And on the program now, in the studio, is the Speaker of the House, our friend Philip Gunn. Good morning, Mr. Speaker.
Hey, good morning, Gerard. Good to see you. I thought you were directing that at me. I walked in about 2 seconds ago, didn't I? You didn't think I was going to make it, did you?
Well, we were looking down the hall for you. Figured you got caught up getting your temperature taken down there.
I did. I walked in, and they made me take my temperature, and then turns out the guy was the brother-in-law of a guy I finished high school with. So
That's
we
cool.
had to talk about that for a few minutes. So, but it said 7:20. I'm here, man. It's 7:20.
You are in the nick of time, as they say. But we very much appreciate you joining us today, Mr. Speaker. So, let's talk about money.
Okay.
That's something you guys got to worry about down there at the Capitol.
That's right.
The news seems to be a little better, a little more favorable than we thought with respect to revenues.
Well, I think everyone needs to. It wouldn't shock anyone to know that we're down. I think we need to keep that in mind. So much of it is a matter of perspective. What did we expect, and what did actually happen? Obviously, early on, there was great concern over what was actually going to happen. Projections were dire. April was a really tough month. I don't know if people know exactly how our budget year works, but we're a July 1 to June 30 fiscal year. So April, May, and June are the last 3 months of our fiscal year, the last quarter.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to that, we were up about $200 million over what we thought we were going to have.
Yeah.
So we were in great shape and looking really good. And then the pandemic hit, and the month of April, I think we went down $245 million. So we wiped out in 1 month all the gains we had made for the previous 9. Expectations were that May was going to be similar, but fortunately May was not as bad as projected. But we're still down for the year. We project we're going to be probably $47 million short for the year, which means we've got to fill that hole in some fashion. And then, of course, projections for next year, beginning July 1, are down as well. So we're going to have to make some cuts in the state budget. We're going to have to scale back a little bit. That's what we'll be doing for the rest of this week and the first of next. We did adopt, we have what we call the Joint Legislative Budget Committee. These are 7 members of the Senate and 7 members of the House that form this committee. We meet and make recommendations. We adopted on Monday a new budget estimate. There's another group called the Revenue Estimating Group, composed of 5 people: the state economist, the head of the Legislative Budget Office, the state treasurer, the commissioner of insurance, and the DFA director. And they sit around and they project the best they can what they think the economy is going to do, and then they make a recommendation to us, and we can either take that recommendation or not. But they made a recommendation to us on Monday. We adopted that revised estimate, which was down about I think at the end of the day we're down about $107 million for the next year.
For fiscal year 2021.
21, right.
But you said $47 million for 2020.
20, right.
Mr. Speaker, a few weeks ago, we were thinking we were going to deplete the entire $550 million out of the rainy day fund.
That is correct.
So,
just to give some perspective, 1% is $55 million.
Right.
So we're talking
1%,
0.9%.
Yeah.
Right at 1%. So if you can get out of this with a 1%.
Incredible
decline, you've really done well. And I think that speaks. I'm gonna make this point. I think this speaks to the great financial shape we were in before the pandemic hit.
Sure.
And that is the result of some tough decisions we've made over the last 8 years. So living within our means, staying within our budget, not spending more money than we have to spend.
Right.
In 2016, that involved making cuts, and it was a tough year. But it paid off because the economy has done well, and we have been responsible in the way we have spent money, and that caused us to be up before this pandemic hit. We were able to weather those kind of crises when you make good financial decisions.
And also maxing out the rainy day fund, which, as you're aware, came under a fair amount of criticism from those that said we should not, in fact, use our surplus to max out the fund, but rather let's spend it on various items that they had in mind to target for that. That looks like it was a pretty good idea at this point. If there's ever been a rainy day, you would have to say that's been it.
I think you're exactly right. I think that makes the point.
Yeah.
This is a rainy day. Spending it on the budget in a year when you've got excess is not a rainy day.
Right.
This is what we talk about when we talk about a rainy day. And you're right. There have been those in the past, leadership in the past, before the Republicans took over, was always apt to try to spend everything we had instead of putting it aside in the bank to save it for things like this. And this just makes the point we would not have been able to weather this had we not been in great financial shape. The rainy day fund exists. It's just kind of like it's a bank account that exists to make up shortfalls. Many people do that in their own homes. They have a rainy day fund or an emergency account, they may want to call it. And it's there to replace the washer and dryer when it goes out or these unexpected things that arise. And by filling it up, there's certain advantages to filling it up. One of the biggest advantages is that the bond rating agencies in New York and other places look at that as far as the financial soundness of a particular state. And so when we do economic development projects, when we do bonds here in Mississippi, our bond rating affects the quality of those bonds, so to speak, and the rating of those bonds. And so the rainy day fund is one of the things they look at. Do you have a full rainy day fund? And so we have a full rainy day fund. That gives us a better bond rating, which allows us to do more things. And that's good for the state of Mississippi.
And also impacts the cost of the debt as well.
Exactly.
So, the higher rated bond, typically the lower interest that
is right.
The issuer of the bond can pay. And so that all figures into that. And essentially they're looking at your balance sheet, and it's kind of like looking at the checkbook in your assets and liabilities, and then they see that you have some reserve over there, and they feel better about your situation because you can weather a storm like this, which means you're able to meet your debt obligations more likely to do so than a state or an entity, a public sector entity, without some sort of reserves in place. So do you anticipate the $47 million, you'll fill that with and cover that with the rainy day fund, or do you anticipate, because the expenses for the year are spent, right? Encumbered, done deal.
The timing of this makes it more difficult. As I said, the fiscal year runs July 1 to June 30. Mm-hmm. What's today? The 17th?
Yeah.
I mean, we're 12 days away or 13 days away from the end of the year. There's no way you can cut 1% out of everybody's budget. They've basically spent all their money for the year.
Yeah, it's encumbered.
So the only way to do that is to find some money from someplace. Doesn't necessarily have to be the rainy day fund, but we can find we have it there if we need it to cover that $47 million, and that's a projection. We don't know over the next 2 weeks. It's going to be around that number, but we can get out of 20 and move on to 21.
Yeah. And so are you figuring the projected shortfall for 2021 in the budget for next year, or are you covering that with a rainy day fund?
No, we'll probably make cuts.
Okay.
The budget will involve cuts for next year. Now, at the front end of a fiscal year, we can do that. We can just reduce everybody's budget and say, hey, you don't have as much money as you have had in the past. Y'all are going to have to tighten your belt.
Sounds like 2.5%.
I'm projecting, and here again, we'll know more as we get into it this week. 3% is what I've been
3%.
Pointing at.
Okay. So
now the other day they were saying 4.8%. So it's going to be somewhere 3 in the 4% range probably. Which every agency I've talked to is thrilled with. I think they were thinking 10 or 12%.
Yeah, double digits.
And when they learn it's 3%, they're like, oh, that's great. We can get by with that. They can absorb that.
Yeah. I want to come back and talk to you about it. Can you stay with us for another second? That's great. So we've got Speaker of the House, Philip Gunn, on the Gallo Show, SuperTalk. So we were talking about money, something we always got to be concerned about here in state government. And some good news with respect to revenue projections, good relative to what the prior projections were. Let's talk about the Coronavirus Relief Fund from the CARES Act, the $1.25 billion that the state received from the federal government, which is really designed to offset costs and expenses more so than it is stimulative. I think there's a lot of confusion about that. $300 million has already been appropriated by the legislature, signed into law, to go to small businesses across Mississippi. There are two programs there, $2,000 automatic payment. Checks are already in the mail, as they say, and then a $25,000 application-based grant program the MDA is administering. What about the other $900 million? What's going on there?
Well, let me touch on that $300 first.
Yeah.
I just received this as we were sitting here, update on how that program is going. As you rightly said, we put $300 million aside to help small businesses. The number of businesses, let me give you some perspective here. Mm-hmm. We identified about 29,000 businesses in this state that fall within those codes that we pulled out.
That the governor shut down.
That's correct.
Ordered closed. Our
plan was to devote $60 million of this money to those businesses that were ordered closed by the governor. Mm-hmm. We just said if you were closed, you were damaged. And we decided that was $2,000 per business. So that's why 29,000 businesses times $2,000 gets you close to that $60 million. We just round up to 30,000 businesses times 2 is $60 million. So that's where the $60 million comes from.
Okay.
Of those 29,000 businesses, there's been 17,500 as of this morning that have registered for that. And we also set aside about $40 million for minority businesses, and about 5,500 of those have applied. So that's excellent news. These are the businesses that have, in the last 2 weeks, applied. Have registered, I should say.
Right.
And Department of Revenue was just cutting checks to those people.
So, but a business has to register. My understanding was
not for that part.
For the $2,000, that's what I thought.
They don't have to register.
It's automatic. You filed a tax return.
That's exactly right. If you filed a tax return and you fall within those 12 or 15 codes that we identified, these would have been like restaurants, hair salons, massage parlors, anything that was ordered closed, you should not have to do anything. The Department of Revenue should have identified your business via tax return, and that check should have come to you or should be coming to you. And so if you're one of those categories and you hadn't got the $2,000 yet, then you need to notify us or notify the Department of Revenue and follow up on that. Now, I will say a number of those businesses hadn't filed tax returns. And if you hadn't filed a tax return, then you're not going to get that $2,000.
We don't know about you.
That's right. So if you hadn't filed a tax return and you hadn't got your $2,000, that's why. But that is a great aspect of this program that's helping us a lot of small businesses. Then there's the other side, which you talked about, the application part, and that's what this is through MDA. Mm-hmm. And the MDA has just sent me a text saying that 17,500 of those businesses have submitted applications. That's in the first week to 10 days. So that program is up and running, and that's the part that you talked about, that they could get up to $25,000 depending on the application. Mm-hmm. We did reserve the first 3 weeks of that program for those who did not get PPP.
From the federal government.
From the federal government. So we're trying to help those businesses who got nothing, and they're the first ones in line for this. So that's good news. Now, the other 900,000 that you mentioned, we are in the process of collecting information as to where those dollars should be spent. We anticipate doing that within the next week. There are a number of people who have requested those dollars. One of the big ones that I think is important is the Unemployment Trust Fund. This is the Mississippi Department of Employment Security, of course, does the unemployment. That fund has been depleted, as you can well imagine, and probably needs to be shored back up. So we could spend a significant amount of these dollars plugging or flushing that fund back up. Then you've got other things like the hospitals. You've got IHL, colleges that have suffered loss. They had to refund room and board at the end of the year. Mm-hmm. They still are uncertain about the enrollment that's coming for the fall. You've got the elections that are coming. We've got to make the the precincts safe. There's a cost involved there.
Big cost.
You've got the distance learning aspect. With children were sent home at the end of the year. Some of them had capabilities to do distance learning. Some did not. So these are just examples there,
Sure.
and I could give you more and more.
So when you say
areas.
you're may I interrupt you, you're gathering information from your members or your
from these agencies,
the agencies themselves, because it's really designed to, again, offset their incremental costs. That's the design of the program. And I think there's confusion, I think, by the general public that that's what the purpose of these monies were as part of the CARES Act. It is not meant to serve as a stimulant, if you will, or to offset revenue. I think it's not really designed to offset revenue.
I think most people who've looked at it realize this is not a stimulus package.
Yeah.
The CARES Act was really, and maybe one small aspect of it was, but really it's designed to replace the costs that were incurred. And you, as you rightly point out, you cannot use it to replace lost revenue, but you can use it to replace costs. An easy example would be colleges. You know, they have, it's easy for them to determine how much it costs them. So I had my chairman of colleges and universities, Dr. Matt Cuddleston. I said, you need to go contact all the state universities and ask them what have they incurred in the way of coronavirus costs to this point. And he gathered that information for me and has given it to me. And we're going to see how far we can go to reimburse some of those costs. And then there are other things that they have yet to learn, like what is their enrollment going to be in the fall. Yeah. You got a lot of students who may not come back. Their mothers and fathers may not let them come back. They just don't know what their enrollment's going to be in the fall. That's just one aspect. Now, like I said, we could talk about hospitals. We could talk about
cities and counties too.
Cities and counties. I mean, they're just
eligible.
One example of the costs that are incurred. So I think the $900 million will be not enough to do everything that we're going to be asked to do. We're just going to make some decisions. And then you've got the aspect of, or the consideration of, do we hold some back just to see what's going to happen? Yeah. As you know, we passed a resolution that allows us to come back in October to adjust if we need to, move some of this money around. So we may make a decision to hold a couple of $100 million back to use then. So those are all the discussions that are going on right now.
And you got the schedule, which is unique because you guys are in session in June, which is weird unto itself. I want to talk to you about that and then the flag before we get off the air here. But tell me about the schedule and how you changed that, and so our listeners will understand there.
Well, we normally operate under deadlines, and there's a deadline to get bills out of committee, deadline to drop bills, the deadlines to do revenue and appropriations, so on and so forth. And those deadlines cause us to get the work done. Now, with this pandemic, we passed a resolution which suspended, we took about a 2-month break, and we passed a resolution before we left to just extend those deadlines till, I think the end of the session right now is July 10th or July 12th or something like that. And so we went to that date, and we just backed up those deadlines from that date. So we are, yesterday was the deadline for us to get today is the deadline for original floor action on bills arising in the other chamber. Okay. So the other chamber for us is the Senate. We've got Senate bills on our side that we've got to deal with today. We have just extended those deadlines in order to let us do what we're doing now. Now, we did pass a resolution last week which moves the end of the session to October the 5th. That is simply for the purpose of us being able to come back and be flexible on what we may need to do with coronavirus-related stuff. And it's solely for coronavirus-related stuff. We can't come back in August and do something pertaining to anything else. It's got to be coronavirus-related. And we just wanted to do that to be flexible and available to adjust if we need to.
Right, because something urgent could come up you need to address.
Well, exactly right. And we continue to see the numbers on this virus every day. We get numbers from the Department of Health. And it's still a lot of cases and still a lot of deaths.
I know you've been one of the outspoken proponents of changing the flag, and there's more traction going on now than ever before. Before we end here, tell us where you think you stand in the legislature on that.
Well, we continue to have discussions with people. I just, as you rightly said, I've always been a vocal proponent of that. I think it's in the best interest of Mississippi. I think the long-term benefits of that outweigh where we are right now. And I don't think our current flag is unifying. I don't think people are rallying behind it or under it, and I think we can find something that would do better for us all.
Mr. Speaker, thanks so much for coming down today and getting your temperature taken and sitting with us in the studio.
It's good to be with you. I don't know if you know this or not, but your son gave batting lessons to my son yesterday.
Awesome.
Yeah, my son needs help, and your son apparently knows everything about hitting a baseball. And
that
so
is awesome.
my 17-year-old son was down there yesterday.